Assalamualaikum and welcome to the Harborne Islamic Study Circle HISC Seerah Session 224. I know we said we finished the Seerah last time, but inshallah what I'm excited to do about is to actually just go through from the very beginning again, but just the summary highlight points. So not in the detail that we've been doing it, but just go over some of the summaries from each of the sessions that we started back in May 2016. Actually, it's been lovely listening back to some of the audio which I have from back then, because we started the videoing about session 70, but I've got audio going back over 10 years, alhamdulillah. But listening to some of the audio of the study circles and then just making sort of a summary of each of the study circles. But before we get on to that, and again, hopefully it'll be much shorter, but it'll probably take another 7 or 8 sessions just to summarize the whole seerah in more bite-sized versions. But last week, just out of completeness, was 223. We talked about the burial of the Prophet. So the Prophet, as we talked previously, passed away on Monday, early on Monday, the 12th of Rabiul Awwal, and then late into Monday night, discussions were happening. They concluded with the people choosing Abu Bakr as-Siddiq as the first Khalifa of the Muslims, and that was by consensus, Ijma Sahaba. We talked about Ijma Sahaba and its importance, and the importance of having a unified political leadership for all Muslims, and that fact was prioritized over the fard, the imperative to bury somebody, not just anybody, but bury the Prophet ﷺ. So how the Muslims prioritize the election and appointment of a Khalif over the burial of our beloved Prophet. Then we talked about at Fajr on Tuesday, Umar ibn al-Khattab addressed the Muslims in the masjid, and he apologized for his behavior the day before, and he asked everyone to give pledge to Ubayya, to Abu Bakr as Khalif. Obviously, most people had already heard that that had been decided, and this is the physical way of demonstrating your allegiance. And then when Abu Bakr had accepted the pledge from the people there, he gave a short and powerful inauguration speech. During this time, we talked about how the family of the Prophet ﷺ, Ahlul Bayt, they had been with the body of the Rasul at this time. That included Ali ibn Abi Talib, Al-Abbas, Al-Abbas's 2 sons, Usama bin Zayd also came, and somebody, one of the Ansari had come, and they washed the Prophet ﷺ. They did a ghusl with him fully clothed, and then they dug the grave on the spot where he had passed away. There wasn't a formal unitary janazah prayer for the Prophet ﷺ, but everyone in Medina and the vicinities of the tribes prayed individually in groups of 10, because it was a small room where he passed away in the house of Aisha. So they prayed in groups of 10 through all of Tuesday into Wednesday, into the evening of Wednesday. And there was a sort of a ranking almost of people. So it started with the family of the Prophet ﷺ. They got priority to pay their respects and pray over the Prophet ﷺ. After the family, then it was the Muhajir, and then the Ansar, and then the women folk, and then the youth. After they buried the Prophet ﷺ, obviously the sense of depression, despair overtook many of them, and this is part of the grieving process, and we've talked about that previously. And we also just briefly discussed the origins of the Shia and the Sunni political disagreement over secession, which later on then led to religious disagreements, and then led to differences in theology and fiqh, but coming out of these sort of allegiances to the different people who thought political authority should be with the house of the Prophet, as opposed to those who thought it should be with the most qualified people. And then we just summarized that and thanked everyone for being with us. So that was the last session. Rewinding back to the very first session, mid-May 2016, we talked about the greatness of Muhammad and what features of our beloved Prophet impressed us and those that came to the study circle, and why the Prophet is the greatest man in history. So some of the reasons that the children and the parents came up with in that very first session was that the trials the Prophet faced, how he helped bad people become good, how he made no mistakes in the deen, he was without sin, how he embodied the Qur'an, he was the walking Qur'an, he always used the best words, he was trustworthy, he never lied, he had a very positive attitude, and he was the most forgiving of human beings. Also, his love for the Ummah, his ihsan in doing all his actions, his leadership qualities, especially in battles, the fact that he was politically astute, and the fact that he was human, so that we could be like him. This is one of the great qualities. And also these characteristics: he was modest in his manner, he was kind, he's honest, hardworking, persistent, dedicated. He controlled his anger despite intense provocation, and he was, kind, loving, and fair, especially with the youngsters and his wives and people he didn't know. And also, in the very first session, we talked about that he changed the way people thought and the way they acted, and this impact transformed humanity. It wasn't just information, it was a transformation which led from that generation to subsequent generations, and for us living in unprecedented stability and peace. His lasting impact and transformation of individuals, of groups, tribes, societies, through only a few years of dawah, 23 years of dawah, and all of that was as a result of that. In the second seerah, we asked about what were people's favorite stories in the seerah, and we'll do some of these in the summaries as well. People talked about the story of Al-Isra wal-Miraj, the night journey, the Battle of Badr, the story when the Prophet blew sand into the eyes of the enemies in the battle, the first revelation, the story of the migration and the cave during the Hijrah, the cave of Thawr, the story of the lady leaving Makkah, the last sermon, when the Prophet also first announced to the people of Makkah on the mount about his message. Obviously, the story of the Qur'an, the story of the Prophet being rejected from Taif, how the Prophet dealt with the lady who threw garbage on him when he used to pray, or when he used to walk by. There's the incident of the battle of Hunain and the spoils of war. How the Prophet he ate sour grapes but didn't say a word. So these were some of the stories that the children and adults felt resonated with them before we formally went through the seerah. Also, we talked about the difference between seerah and sunnah. The biography of a person is called the seerah. And the word seerah comes from the verb to travel. So it's as if you're traveling in the footsteps or the journey of somebody. That's where the word seerah comes from, to travel. Sunnah is rather more complicated. Linguistically, it means path or way. So sunnah means path or way. In legal or juristic terminology, sunnah has three different definitions. It depends on the disciplines of Islamic culture. So to the ulama of the scholars of hadith, sunnah refers to all that is narrated from the Prophet ﷺ, including his acts, his sayings, and his silence, where he tacitly approves of something that he is aware of. And all the reports that describe his physical attributes and character, these are, to the ulama of hadith, classified as sunnah. To the ulama, the scholars of fiqh, jurisprudence, sunnah refers to the category of actions which are mandub or nafil, recommended actions. And in this sense, sunnah is used synonymously with mandub, the desirable. To the ulama, the scholars of usul al-fiqh, sunnah refers to another source of Shari'ah along with the Qur'an. You have the Qur'an and sunnah. and that is seen as the source for Shari'ah. Thus, the usage of in the usage of Usul al-Fiqh, one might say that the fasting days other than Ramadan is from Sunnah, denoting that Sunnah has validated this ruling from the scholars. So we talked about that. Moving on to the third session, we talked about the names of the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ, obviously we know as Muhammad, one who is continuously praised, and that is used by Musa in the Qur'an in terms of being continuously praised. There is Ahmed, which means the highest quality of praise, and that's a phrase that's used by Isa in the Qur'an. Both of these names, Muhammad and Ahmed, come from Hamadah, right? And Hamd means to praise. And that's praising not in return for somebody doing a favor, but it is the highest possible level of praise. It's praising because somebody is worthy of being praised, simply because of the inherent characteristics of that person that is being praiseworthy. So in a hadith of Sahih Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ said, I have a number of names. I am Muhammad, I am Ahmed, I am Mahee, I am Hashir, I am Aaqib, I am Nabi-ur rahmah, and I am Nabi-ut tawbah, I am Muqaffah, and also Nabi-ul, malaahim. So just going through all of those, Mahee is the one whom Allah erases or wipes out kufr. And again, we can see that through the Prophet ﷺ, kufr was wiped out of early Arabia. Hashir is a people who will be resurrected in his footsteps. So this is signaling that on the Day of Judgment, people that the Prophet ﷺ will be the first of those to be resurrected. So that's one of his names, Hashir, and people will be following him in that. Aaqib is the one who has no prophet after him, i.e. the one who cuts off, the one who is at the end. That's a name of the Prophet ﷺ. There's Nabi-ur rahmah, the embodiment of rahmah and mercy. Hence, we have the rahmatul alameen, right? So he is the embodiment of mercy. He is a Nabi-ut tawbah, the prophet of repentance. He is the source of repentance, meaning that by believing in the Prophet ﷺ and by following his teachings, people can be forgiven. And he described himself in this hadith as Muqaffah, the one who comes at the end and makes the previous prophets complete. So the one who makes the message of the previous prophets complete. So the one who basically comes at the end of a long chain is Muqaffah. And Nabi-ul malaahim, the prophet that will signal a lot of trials. So these are some of the names of the Prophet ﷺ that we talked about. So why do we study Seerah? We talked about that in the fourth session. It's the history of Islam. So we're not just studying a biography of a single person. We're studying the history of our deen, our religion. We study it for the love of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we develop a proper love of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in our hearts by studying the Seerah. And loving Muhammad is Ibadah, it's worship. We study Seerah to follow the best example and the most perfect role model. And Allah says this in the Qur'an, indeed, there for you in the Messenger of Allah is an exemplary manner, a perfect conduct for you to follow. So Allah is addressing us that the perfect person for us to follow is the Prophet ﷺ. He is the best example. That is why we study Seerah, for the history of Islam, the love of the Prophet ﷺ, to follow the best example. We also study the Seerah to understand the Qur'an. The Qur'an is a very complex and non-typical book, very profound, but you cannot understand the Qur'an without knowing the context of some of these revelations. Some of the verses are standalone, some of the Aqidah verses are standalone, but a lot of the other verses come in context to the Seerah. They come as a rebuttal, or they come talking about an incident in the Seerah. So to understand the Quran, you need to understand the Seerah of the Prophet. We need to study the Seerah of the Prophet. We study the Seerah because this is the best generation, right? The life and times of the Prophet and the life of times of his Sahabi. This is the best generation who ever lived, right? The generation of the Sahabi. And Allah mentioned this in 7 or 8 times in the Quran, that Allah is pleased with them and they are pleased with Allah. So another reason to study the Seerah, because we're studying the best of generations. We're studying about the best place on earth, Makkah and Medina. So that's another reason to study the Seerah. The Prophet said, look, I am making Medina holy, just like Ibrahim made Makkah holy by the permission of Allah. And we study the Seerah as a life, because the life of the Prophet is a testimony to his prophethood. So just by studying the Seerah and his life in itself, this becomes an evidence of the Prophet's prophethood, his Nabi-ut, right? Here you've got an individual who was living a perfectly anonymous, fairly sort of uneventful life until he was about 40. And then, something astounding and miraculous happened. He had his morals and his character and his disposition beforehand, but he was illiterate. But then, he, transformed all of society, the way people are, for generations to come within a very short space of time. So by studying that people would say that in itself is an evidence of the miracle and the support of Allah through him, where he brought about one of the greatest changes in human history and development, that the world has ever seen in such a short space of time, an enduring legacy. And that is, we appreciate that by studying the Seerah. We study the Seerah because it's Ibadah, it's a worship, right? There is ajr, there is reward in studying the life of the Prophet. We are worshipping Allah by studying the Seerah, by coming together and listening to the Seerah, studying the life of the Prophet. This is an Ibadah in of itself. By studying the Seerah, we are developing our Muslim character, right? We have a strong sense of our Islamic history, our Muslim history, and we have this sense of being part of this global Muslim Ummah, right? And by having this strong study of the beginnings of Islamic history, we learn about our past, about our values, about our role models and our heroes, right? The best generation. So that's why we study Seerah. Also, as we've seen, by studying the Seerah, it raises our iman when things get tough. It makes us believe firmer and deeper and more profound when we relate our present situation to that of the Prophet ﷺ and what he went through. It gives us hope. It raises our spirits. It gives us a sense of optimism in life, and especially nowadays when we're seeing a lot of the persecution that is happening, not just in the Muslim countries, but also in Western countries, and gives us a way of navigating some of the issues that we have. We relate it to the Darul Kufr that was around in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and we can then tackle our own situation much better. Also, the studying the life of the Prophet ﷺ, this illustrates for us a method we can use to bring about the revival of the Ummah, right? So the steps of the steps that an Islamic movement must take to revive the Ummah, because we're in a sad state at the moment, and there's we have to say that in geopolitical terms. And look at what's happened with the earthquakes recently. That the help and support is not there as quick as it should be, given the global ummah and the wealth that we have, and the resources that we have. People, are not supporting those that are suffering as well as they could have. right? So by studying the life of the Prophet, we look at the steps that there are to revive the Ummah. So he started with his secret dawah, right? Choosing, a small group of people, doing secret dawah to them. Then that dawah became public, but now, and the nature of that public interaction was one of highlighting the inadequacies of their values and culture and society and bringing about Islam as an alternative. And then later on, seeking support of those who were physically able to establish Islam as a way of life, an Islamic state, and that protects Islam and its citizens. So there's a methodology of bringing about revival, and that's why we study the Seerah. And also, we see all the attacks, not just people bending the Qur'an, but people attacking the Prophet ﷺ nowadays. So the best way to defend the honor of the Prophet ﷺ is to have knowledge about the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And only through understanding the life of the Prophet ﷺ can we defend the honor of the Prophet ﷺ. And we see that when the Quraysh fabricated against the Prophet ﷺ, they called him mad, they called him a magician, a poet, the equivalent of people now saying the Prophet ﷺ is a womanizer, is a terrorist, is a madman. These were the things that the propaganda against the Prophet ﷺ at that time. So we need to counter the current prevalent propaganda against the Prophet ﷺ, and the only way to do that is to study the Seerah first. Then in the fifth session, we talked about some of the characteristics of the Prophet ﷺ, and what makes him a prophet, what makes him so great. And some of these, just listing them, again, I'm not going to go in detail with them. I'll upload the audio session soon, inshallah. But he is, as we all know, the final prophet, the seal of prophethood. He is Khataman Nabiyin, right? He is the last of the prophets. No other prophet will come after him. Anyone else who claims prophethood after our beloved prophet, we know that they are a liar, and the curse of Allah is upon them. So the Prophet ﷺ, another characteristic of the Prophet ﷺ is that he was decreed before Adam became man. And the Prophet ﷺ said this in a hadith: when Adam was between the teen, the mud, and the ruh, before the ruh was blown in, Allah had already destined and declared that I would be coming for mankind. So he was decreed before Adam. Prophet ﷺ, he is sent for all of humanity. He's the only prophet who has been specifically sent for all of humanity, including jinn, in addition also to jinn, we'll talk about that in a second, but be sent to all of humanity. Almost sort of by coincidence, Adam alayhi salam and Nuh alayhi salam were sent for all of humanity, but that was because that's all of the humans that were left around, right? So rather than them having a universal message, they preached to the people who were around at the time. Obviously, Adam, his offspring, and then Nuh, all of the non-Muslims had been destroyed, so therefore all the Muslims had remained. And so when he's preaching second time round, again, he's technically for what's left of humankind. But our Prophet is given the honor of preaching for all of humankind, Muslims and non-Muslims. And as we just mentioned, Prophet, not just for humans, he was also sent to the jinn as well. And we talked about that in the Seerah, where he would go some evenings, the night of the jinn, for example, when he went and he preached to the jinn. The Prophet says that another characteristic that he has is that Allah strikes fear in his enemies. And so when in some of the battles, the Prophet said, Allah has helped me with ru'ub, and that Allah will inflict into my enemies fear before I have reached them. And again, that explains why some of the battles ended up as they did. The Prophet, he's been given the largest of all the ummah of all the prophets. And we talked about that in heaven and hell, etc., where the Prophet is looking at all of humanity afterwards, and all of the people are gathered behind their prophets. And he at once thought that Musa's had such a large following, but then he was told to look on the other side, and he saw that his ummah was sort of more than any of the other prophets, and that's a blessing of the Prophet ﷺ. Prophet, he is a living. He came with a living miracle, and that is the miracle of the Qur'an. So all the other prophets, they came with historical miracles that were for that period in time, right? We are not able to witness them. Right, we have to take it, as has been explained. But we cannot witness those miracles, bringing back people from the dead, or the splitting of the rock where the camel comes out. All of those miracles, right? We've heard of them, but we were not witness to them. But however, the Prophet, he is given the Qur'an, which is a living miracle. People recite it, people can have access to it, and they can then, through interaction with it, now still appreciate that it is a miracle, right? Prophet was given the night journey, the journey of Al-Isra wal-Miraj. Even Jibreel alayhi salam was not able to go further, because beyond which he went to a point where the Prophet went to a point beyond where Jibreel could go, and it's recorded where Jibreel said, "This is where it ends for me. I can go no further." And the Prophet was allowed to go further. And we talked about that in terms of the Sidratul Muntaha, etc. Before. And that's a huge blessing of the Prophet. Again, the blessing of the Prophet, he is the leader of all humanity. The Prophet said, not in a boastful way, but in a matter-of-fact way, in one of the hadith, "I am the Sayyid," the one who is sort of the leader of the children of Adam. And again, on the Day of Judgment, that will be attested that he is the leader. The Prophet will be the first to be resurrected. The Prophet's grave will be the first to be opened up when the second trumpet is blown, and that's when the Prophet's grave will open. He will have the largest hawd, sort of collection of water, cistern, pool, lake, whatever you call it, and he described it as being sort of, squarish in shape, and the size of it is from, one side is from Makkah to Sana'a, which is sort of in Yemen. So it's, a body of water that's almost half of the Arabian Peninsula, and that pool is fed from the river Al-Kawthar, direct from Jannah. And then Prophet will give his followers a drink from that. He'll personally give us a drink, and that will banish thirst forever for all of us, inshallah. And so we said, so not just the fact that the Prophet will be given that pool of water on the Day of Judgment. The Prophet is promised the largest river in Jannah, which is Al-Kawthar, from which all the other rivers in Jannah flow. The Prophet, he'll be the first across the Seerah, the bridge to Jannah. He will be the first to knock on the doors of Jannah and have them opened for him. The angels are not allowed to open them for anyone else. The Prophet will be the first to enter into Jannah, which he'll do with his right foot, of course, since Adam and Hawa had left Jannah. And the Prophet has Maqam al-Mahmud on the Day of Judgment, when all of humanity, as we said, will be praising him. All of humanity will be sending their salah and salam upon him, right? Even those who have rejected his call, even those who have ridiculed him or mocked him or maligned him, they will be forced by the very nature of the day to send their salam and their greetings upon the Prophet ﷺ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed our beloved Prophet ﷺ with the highest level of Jannah, the place which is under the Arsh, under the throne of Allah. This is the pinnacle of Jannat al-Firdaus al-A'la, and it's an entire level of Jannah all to itself, under the shade of the throne of Allah, and that has been promised to the Prophet ﷺ. So that was session 5. Session 6, we talked about the ancestry of the Arabs and who are the Arabs. So, Adam had many children. Prophet Nuh had lots of children and sons, including Shem, and that's where we get the word Semite from, sons of Shem. and amongst their children are the sort of many generations. You get to Ibrahim alayhi salam, and and then you've got some of the other Arab tribes. And we talked before about there are three main Arabic or Arab tribes. There's the extinct Arab tribes, and Allah makes reference to them, including the tribes of Ad and Thamud, who were destroyed. But so we have they have no progenitors. They don't have any lineage left from them. So these Arab tribes have been cut off. And again, going back thousands of years, we know that the Arabian Peninsula was green and lush and full of vegetation, not the desert that it is now, and tribes thrived in that environment. But Ad and Thamud are some of those that have been wiped out by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then you've got the pure Arabs, again, going back through the lineage all the way through to Adam alayhi salam. You have pure Arabs who came from the progeny of Yarub bin Qatan. And so they're known as the Qatani Arabs. And amongst the Qatani Arabs, you have they sort of spread from the Yemen into the Arabian Peninsula, and these include the Aus and the Khazraj. Then you've also got the Arabized Arabs, so those that are non-Qatani Arabs, but who originated from the descendants of Ismail, right? And these are known as the Adnani Arabs, and the Prophet is an Adnani Arab. So Ibrahim, as we know, Ibrahim al-Islam, he was from Iraq area. He is from a city called Ur, near modern-day Kufa, on the west bank of the Euphrates River. He left Ur, went to Haran, and then he went to Palestine and Egypt. We know that the king tried to do evil things with Ibrahim al-Islam's wife Sarah, but then Allah saved them, and then the king of Egypt was paralyzed, and then he gave his daughter Hashir to serve Ibrahim and Sarah. Sarah then gave Hashir to Ibrahim to be Ibrahim al-Islam's wife. Ibrahim al-Islam returned to Palestine from Egypt, where Hashir gave birth to Ismail. Then Ibrahim took Hashir and Ismail to the Hijaz desert, nothing there, to the sacred house. Obviously, there wasn't a house there, and left them there. And then we know the story of the baby crying and Zamzam coming out. And then as the Zamzam's coming out, then the tribe of Jurham were passing by. They asked permission to use some of the water, and Hajj said, yeah, but the water is mine. And then you've got the settlement that crops up from there, from where Zamzam was. Then Ibrahim al-Islam, he visits Makkah again, the story of the sacrifice of Ismail, and then later on Ibrahim visits again and he builds the Kaaba. And so we talked about the ancestry of the Arabs. Then we talked about sort of more specifically some of the more recent ancestry. I mean, so then you have the religion of Ibrahim in the Arabian Peninsula around Makkah for over 2,000 years, and people followed that, and it was known as the Hunafa, the religion of Ibrahim, and the rituals that they did, go in running between Safa and Marwa, and doing tawaf, and the sacrifice of the goats, etc. These were all instigated by Ibrahim al-Islam, and the people continued those. Then we talked in session 7 about Qusay and Abdul Muttalib, and Jurham were there, and then another tribe, Khuzā, came and they took over from Jurham, and they reigned in Makkah for over 300 years. And during that time, the tribe, the Adnani Arabs, had been dispersed, so they were sort of like banished from Makkah, and they sort of spread throughout the Najd to Bahrain and Iraq and other places, and a small group of the Quraysh stayed in Makkah. and there were some families, Hulul, Harum, and families of Kinana. We talk about Bani Kinana many times in the Seerah, but they were sort of second-class citizens. And then Qusay bin Kilab, son of Kilab, was born. He returned. He still lived in Makkah, went out, came back, and when he came back, Makkah was being ruled by one of the Khazar called Halil bin Habsha, who was impressed by Qusay and gave his daughter Hubba as wife to Qusay. After Halil died, a war broke out between the Khuzar and the Quraysh, because obviously Qusay wanted his own tribe to come, and there was a power struggle, and then Qusay basically won that power struggle and took control of Makkah and the Kaaba. So the reign of Qusay then started, and it said it's about 440 AD, and then he called back all of the Adnan tribe and all of the other sort of Quraysh type people. And then Qusay, he established the Nadwa, Darul Nadwa. We talk about the assembly house, and which is on the north side of the Kaaba, and that's the meeting place for the Quraysh. And then he instituted these other aspects of the society, the prestigious elements of Meccan society. So there's who's in charge of Al-Nadwa, who, that fell to, Qusay. He decided that, he started these 5 things, looking after the Darul Nadwa. There's the standard, who can go to war, who keeps the doors of the Kaaba, who provides water for the pilgrims, and who feeds the pilgrims. So these 5 different tasks, and they all have honor. Then Abdul Manaf was his son, his chosen son. So Qusay's chosen, not his eldest son. His eldest son was Abdul Dar, but he chose Abdul Manaf to take over all of these privileges. And then Abdul Manaf had all of those things. When Abdul Manaf died, then there became a power struggle amongst the children of Abdul Manaf and the children of Abdul Dar. And the issue of the standard, who's allowed to launch war, that later fell to the sons of Abdul Dar. The looking after the gates, the doors of the Kaaba, who has the keys, who can open it, who cleans it, etc. That was later again the sons of Abdul Dar, who provides water for the pilgrims. And again, it's a privileged thing. This is before Zamzam was refound, as it were. That was for the sons of Abdul Manaf, which then passed on to Hashim bin Abdul Manaf, and that's where you get Banu Hashim from. And again, that's important. And then Abdul al-Muttalib bin Abdul Manaf, and then later Abdul Muttalib bin Hashim. And we'll talk about that, inshallah. And then who feeds the pilgrims? That was the sons of Abdul Dar, and then later Banu Hashim as well, Hashim bin Abdul Manaf. And so we then also talked about Abdul Muttalib bin Hashim. So when Abdul Muttalib was a little boy, he was taken to Medina. There were some issues around, his parents. Then his uncle Al-Muttalib heard that there was somebody in Medina who looked like one of his family. He went there, he saw him, and he basically brought him back. He didn't quite kidnap him, but he basically said, "You have a right to be and sort of a noble person in amongst the Quraysh." But the people didn't know who he was, so they called him Abdul Muttalib, the servant of Al-Muttalib, whereas he said, "Look, he's my nephew, the son of my brother Hashim." Then there's the story of Abdul Muttalib having this dream to dig Zamzam in a particular place. He found the things that the tribe of Jurham had buried there and sort of covered over covered over the source of Zamzam, some swords and gold, etc. And then we talked about how he said, well, the water is his, and then there was a sort of a fight going to be around who has the right to the water. He said, look, I saw the dream, I dug the water, I have control over the water. So then they decided to go and consult somebody from Bani Sa'd, a diviner, sort of a sage, a wise person. And then on the way there, Allah showed them the signs and then confirmed that Abdul Muttalib has the rights over Zamzam. And sort of Abdul Muttalib made that famous vow that should he keep the water, he will then sacrifice his 10th son if he has 10 sons. And we'll talk about that later on, inshallah. So I'll stop there. That was sort of the first 6-7 sessions of the study circle. The next session, inshallah, we'll just quickly go over the story of Abraha, how paganism entered into Makkah, in Amr bin al-Luhay of the Khuzah, bringing Hubbul. Then we talk about, again, we'll just recap on the family of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ, son of Abdullah, son of Abdul Muttalib, son of Hashim, son of Abdul Manaf, son of Qusay, son of Kilab. And we'll talk about that. Then we'll talk about some of the Hunafa around the time, just before the Prophet ﷺ. There were 4 well-known people who rejected paganism, but then they were looking for the truth, and these included Zayd bin Amr bin Nufail, Uthman bin al-Huwarith, Ubaydullah bin Jahsh, and the most famous is Waraka ibn Nawfal. And then we'll get on to some of the stories, the time of the birth of the Prophet ﷺ, him being in the desert, the Buhaira and the shepherd, Hilf al-Fudul. We'll then talk about his marriage with Khadija, again, all before the time of prophethood, the rebuilding of the Kaaba, and then the start of revelation, Iqra, and the start of Nabi-ut, becoming a messenger, and propagating the message. Some of the early converts in Islam. We'll talk about Darul Arqam, the house of Arqam, where they did the dawah. We'll talk about the open stage of dawah, and then the backlash that happened amongst the elite in Makkah, some of the reasons behind that, things that the elite in Makkah did, like banning the Qur'an, mocking the Prophet ﷺ, slandering against the Prophet ﷺ, and then the Prophet ﷺ, his conversations with Abu Talib, some of the compromises that were being offered. Then sort of things go up a notch, where they start torturing the Muslims and making life difficult for the Prophet ﷺ. How they sent some people to Medina, to the Jews in Medina, to try and trick the Prophet ﷺ with some trick questions. And then we'll talk about some of the specific persecutions against the Prophet ﷺ, where he then sent the Muslims to Abyssinia. Then there's the satanic verses that we'll talk about, the incident of satanic verses, which is fabricated, but we'll talk about that. People from Abyssinia coming back and then having to go back again. The stories around Jafar and the conversation with the Najashi, and then coming under the protection of Najashi. Then the other important things, which were the conversion of Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib, the conversion of Umar bin al-Khattab, and then the next level of Quraysh backlash and propaganda. Final negotiations with the Prophet ﷺ, and then the instigation of the boycott, and then the year of grief with the death of Khadija, the death of Abu Talib, and the visit to Taif. And then we sort of talked about when things are at that low point, Al-Isra wal-Miraj, how it happened, where it happened, the things that happened in the Al-Isra wal-Miraj, and then some of the early other conversions like Abu Dhar, Salman al-Farsi. And then we get on to the actual Nusra, the help and the support. We talk about the people of Yathrib, which we just mentioned, their genealogy, some of the tribes there, the first pledge of Aqaba, the pledge of women, the pledge of war, the second pledge, what happened after the pledge, and then the preparations for the Hijrah and some of the Hijrah stories, what happened in Medina, who are the people of Medina, the background to that, and then the actual stories of the Hijrah, how it happened, what happened during the Hijrah, and then when the Prophet got there, the building of the mosque in Quba, some of the lessons from Hijrah, and then the start of Medinan society, building the mosque, creating the Brotherhood, making new society, a new economy, a new constitution, and all of those things, the change of the Qibla, and then sort of the other things that happen in terms of the tensions with the Jews and the hypocrites, and then the battles. All of that, inshallah, we'll quickly cover over the next few weeks, inshallah. So until then, do remember us in your du'as. Do remember the people who are suffering, all the Muslims in your du'as, especially those people in Syria and in Turkey at the moment. Inshallah, I hope everyone is doing what they can, not just du'as, but sort of donating and supporting all the efforts there. And I hope people are preparing for Ramadan, which is not that far away, inshallah. So until next time, inshallah, do remember in your du'as, please. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاك الله خير. السلام عليكم.